and I would like to welcome JJ Askar. JJ Askar works as a developer advocate representing the IBM Cloud all over the world. He mainly focuses on IBM Kubernetes Service and OpenShift, trying to make companies and the user have a successful onboarding to the cloud native ecosystem. He's also been known, for DevOps tooling ecosystem and generalized Linux communities. He has recently dove headfirst into Fedora since IBM buying Red Hat, but still secretly wants, free BSD wherever he is. So he's always trying to become a better web technology developer, though normally just uses Bash to get the job done. He's an amazing developer advocate. So with that, he's going to present to us a topic on we accidentally created a cloud on our IBM Cloud. I would like to welcome JJ Askar.
Hi. Thank you so much. And oh no, I prepared the wrong talk. I set up migrating a monolith to cloud native and the stumbling blocks you might not know about. I'm so sorry if I got that wrong. It's still a good talk. Hopefully you'll be okay with that. I'm so sorry. But yes, hi, I'm JJ. I'm a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud, as Shriva said a moment ago. I am calling in from Austin, Texas. So it is actually very late for me. I'm very sleepy. So if I get a little loopy, please don't hold that against me. And I really do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com, and you can find me on Twitter at JJAsgar. So let's get going. So I'm going to tell this story from a company called Asgar Labs. Yes, Asgar Labs is fake. And I'm going to be kind of using it as a guise to describe the stumbling blocks if you were moving into the cloud native ecosystem, to just kind of not understand what might be ahead of you. There's a lot of different opportunities, and Asgar Labs is just going to be a culmination of all these different companies that I've had an opportunity to work with as an IBMer, to be able to see, just kind of see these stumbling blocks to make sure that you might not know about these questions, and hopefully it'll work better for you. In all seriousness, it's just a fake company. It's just a way to kind of make sure that I don't actually call out different companies' names of companies that I work with. But I'll reference it here and there. So what did Asgar Labs think they needed to do? They started their ecosystem, their move into the cloud native ecosystem just as they went from bare metal to VMs. You probably have some companies out there, you probably know some people, some companies out there that moved from bare metal to VMware or OpenStack to be able to run, to get more VMs or more consolidation of machines. Instead of having one big server, they have a bunch of little servers. So Asgar Labs thought, well, why don't we just, take the same process we did for bare metal to VMs and just do that to containers. They believe that same technique would just be the way for moving their monolithic application to cloud native. Well, where I come into the story is after they've kind of made that decision, and they've had a few migrations where successes they thought were successful. I disagreed, so I came in and had this conversation with them. They thought they were going to be successful with certain little changes here and there. And I came in as this cloud native person to be able to say, hey, you've wasted all this time and effort, and you didn't realize that these issues were down the line. So maybe if we take a step back and have a larger conversation, things will happen. So I started coming up with some really strong questions that honestly are a little bit awkward to have, but they actually do help make sure that you are going down the correct path. Excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. So let's take a moment and ask the questions that you should ask, but if you're moving from your monolithic application to cloud native. These are some very straightforward questions, but they are deceptively hard to answer. And when you start talking to your engineers or your leadership team or your leadership team tells you that you need to move this way, maybe you should take a moment and take a breath and ask these questions. First of all, who containerized your app? Honestly, take a moment and think about that one application in your infrastructure and you've containerized it. Was it your dev team that containerized it? Was it your DevOps team that containerized it? Was it a completely different team that you have no interaction with apart from every once in a while? Do you have a couple status meetings every once in a while to see who got it done? Do you actually have a real feedback loop? That's a really hard question to ask in some more enterprises. You might just be shipped a container and told to run it. And there's so much more involved there. You need to have real conversations about who put your app together. You need to work and collaborate between the project teams and who shipped the actual thing. And the next question you need to ask is simply, why did you containerize your app? And Asgard Labs containerized their apps because they were told to. Some up on high executives said, we need to containerize our applications to make sure that we are next gen. Well, I mean, why? Like, if you have an application that is a monolithic app that makes you money or is in the black, right? Like, it actually brings in actual money. If you try to containerize that application and you don't understand what it takes to get to containerization, it's possible you'll start taking a loss there. And when you start talking to your CEOs or your CFOs or your COOs or your C-suite in general and say, well, we can containerize this application that does this thing for us, but we're going to have to take 6 months of engineering time, of 6 months of engineers spending their time and effort to containerize that, not to really gain anything. You're not going to get anywhere. That doesn't work. So you need to really take a moment and ask why. I've also seen another company out there that said that they just wanted to say that they were on the cloud, right? Like they wanted to move from their co-located data center, that they had working machines making a good amount of money, but they had told their VC firm that they needed, or they were told by their VC firm to be on the cloud because they wanted to get rid of the co-location. It turns out the company went under because the migration was so bad. So you really do need to ask why are you doing these things? And then next question is where? Like, where do you plan on deploying your application, or where have you deployed it? Like, did you get to choose the cloud you got to work with? Obviously, I'm very partial to the IBM Cloud because I work for IBM. But if you've gone to one of my competitors, did you get to choose to go there, or was it part of some ELA? Like, if you went to Azure or AWS or IBM Cloud, was it something forced upon you, or did you actually do a moment and took a moment and ask, what are the benefits? One of the reasons why AWS is so successful is because they have so many other services there that you just start buying more and more of their services, and before you know it, you can't leave their cloud because your DNS is in Route 53, and that's a lot of work to get out of there. So you need to ask, where are you going to deploy this to? If you're going to go multi-cloud, that's a whole nother conversation that you have to think about. So take a moment and think about that too. And then finally, what did we actually containerize? Like, did we just take a WAR file and put it in the Java container and then ship it out? At Asgard Labs, I saw one opportunity where that's where I came in. They were like, JJ, we're cloud native. We've got a 3-node cluster here. We take our WAR file, put it into this Java container, and then we push it out to our CI, and it shows up. But it's weird because it only runs on one machine. Like, we have a 3-node cluster, and it's only on one machine's always ever working. And I asked them, I'm like, well, you have one container, and it's in one pod. You don't split pods across Kubernetes. It doesn't work that way. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you are literally wasting money. Like, you're not leveraging Kubernetes for what it needs to do. So let's take a quick little aside here and talk about some architectural changes that you need to start thinking about as you start moving down this path. This is that re-platform example that I just mentioned, and this is one of the first steps you have to think about. Obviously, I'm an IBMer, so I'm very partial to WebSphere. So you take your legacy application here, and you put it into the Liberty container or whatever container you want, and you shove it on Kubernetes or OpenShift. I mean, arguably, that's a step in the right direction, but it's only a portion of it. If you're not leveraging Kubernetes or OpenShift for what it is, if you have one cluster to run that one application because you had your one application on that level just before on like one machine, you're not benefiting. You're not using cloud native for what it is. So take a moment and realize that this is just one of the steps to go there. You need to take more. And let's talk about some of those. The next step is repackaging everything as microservices. Microservices is relatively, on a theory level, it's pretty makes sense. Like if you have this application again, and you have a couple of WAR files and you have some middleware there, you start breaking up the WAR files into smaller little containers that now that they're spread over the whole cluster, it's a little bit easier. You have a shared message queue there. Things are starting to be a little bit better. Oh, I see a lot of companies stop here. And for me, I tell them no. You've made the first jump. Now you're getting to microservices, but now you have different levels, so you can release your applications at different skill or different times. You're not set to waterfall releases. Now you can actually release your software at the time you need to, because now it's all just deployments. That's great. But what you really need to go to is something called the strangler pattern and a refactor. And yes, I just told you need to refactor your code if you're moving into the cloud native ecosystem. And that's true. Like you are going to have to look at your application in a different way. The strangler pattern basically starts looking at different portions of your application and start turning them, like looking and being able to break them out as their own little process and then have their own little entity. And yes, it is a little bit challenging, and it does require a different way of thinking about it. But before you know it, working down that strangler pattern in the cloud native ecosystem, you start leveraging the platform for the power that it has. Kubernetes and OpenShift really do have this amazing ecosystem around them that allows it to scale to the level that you need to run your business at. But you will need to actually sit down and re-architect things and refactor your code. So let's talk about some of those. Well, I've already touched briefly on the architectural advantages and disadvantages, but let's jump into a little bit more specific things. First of all, one of the major advantages is velocity. You really do get better velocity because you start focusing on the different portions of your application, where now instead of having one person who understands the whole ecosystem, you have teams of people who focus on different widgets that allows for them to get the features out as quickly as they need to be. The joke is in this cloud native ecosystem and this new software development world, if you've come up with an idea, the longer it takes you to get that to market, your competitor will get it to market in that time frame. So you really do need to, as soon as you think about it, be able to get fingers on keyboards and deploy it as quickly as possible. Also, be able to scope your clusters to what you actually need. I know it sounds weird because, I'm an IBMer and I obviously want you to use the IBM Cloud, but I don't want you to use a Kubernetes cluster, an OpenShift cluster in the wrong way. I want you to actually scope your clusters so you get the best benefit out of it. Like, yes, of course, it's nice for you to use my software and my hardware more for me to earn more money, but I would rather you have a good experience with it and not just spend $6,000 a month on something that doesn't do anything. I'd rather have you spend $3,000 a month on something that actually scopes and gives you business so you can actually see the value of what brings it in. But at the same time, there's some real disadvantages of moving down this path where you're going to require a much higher level of cooperation. And I'm going to say that throughout this talk, where cooperation is key to being able to move into a cloud native ecosystem. You'll need to build out more advanced integration tests. You're going to have to really sit down and think about a different deployment policy system because there's going to be different ways to deploy your stuff. No longer are you going to be sitting there in front of your CCB. Now, I didn't realize that this is a US-centric term, so I'm sorry about this. But at least in where I've grown up inside the industry, the CCB was also known as the Change Control Board. And I was at an Asgard Labs company once where they actually had a weekly meeting, just like they did in the Phoenix project, where they put all the middle management in a room and be able to do a thumbs up to say, yes, we need to release that change on like a Saturday night at 3 a.m. or something like that, right? So yes, the goal is to move away from the CCP. The goal is to remove that layer of bureaucracy so you can actually focus on moving towards the velocity that you need to for your business. It's really weird nowadays, especially because we have pipelines and automation around things. Just take a moment and think about it. Like, if you put something in the pipeline to get released, you should be able to get that out the door as quickly as possible. But if you had to make every single change go through a remedy ticket or a JIRA ticket that everybody has to click yes on, that seems weird, right? Like, it doesn't work like that. That's something from the older times, but it's still around. So the next question is, are we doubling up on things? Like, believe it or not, you probably are, to be brutally honest. Back to the Java application earlier that I was talking about, I thought it was really weird when I asked. I was like, so everything is this one pod, and this pod grows when new jobs are spun up inside of it. You realize Kubernetes is a scheduler, right? Like, if you created those as microservices and had the scheduler say, oh, I need to spin up some more pods to run these different microservices to do it, you're leveraging the platform for what it's powerful for. But instead, you have this one cluster, or this cluster with 3 nodes, one node on it that has the pod, and then at 6 a.m. every day, because it has to do its batch processing or whatever, that machine goes down because it overloads the machine with too much processing. Like, you're not leveraging for what it needs to do. So you really do need to take a moment and think about the things that you might be doubling up on. And by the way, yes, if you have any questions, please ask away however they've asked you to ask, and hopefully it'll get back to me. And I have a private chat going with the organizers, so I'd love to answer anything that comes down the line. Also, when you start looking into Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem, there's a load balancer built inside of there, right? So like, there's an actual like real load balancer built in front of Kubernetes and OpenShift now, like on the software layer. So if you're running an F5 inside your data center that runs your application, you need to think you might actually have multiple network hops before you actually get to your application, which is actually could be a real problem. So again, yes, it is very possible that we're doubling up on things. So isn't automation good here? Of course it is. Like, you need to leverage automation to make these things happen. Like, as you move down this path, you are going to start using more and more automation. But why are things so complicated? Well, I mean, honestly, they've probably always been this complicated. It's just now you have real visibility into it. A good friend of mine, Rob Kidd, said this in one of our conversations that I just immediately stole and put in this presentation. It's like, you got to imagine, you had an ordinary bull mastiff. And if you don't know what a bull mastiff is, it's a dog. It's a really, really big dog. And now when you move to cloud native, you have 13 yipping chihuahuas that are just sitting there going, yip, 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 yip. Which, I mean, obviously they're different problems for different situations, but that's what you're doing. From the monolithic app to the microservices cloud native ecosystem, you have two very different style dogs there, and you have to treat them in very different ways. So it's something to keep in mind. And then to take another quote from a great friend of mine named Ken, we've replaced our monolithic app, we're monolithic with microservices, and every outage is now a murder mystery. Turns out he actually stole this from someone else who I believe stole it from someone else. But I really do. This is true. When you start going down this path, you are going to need a way to standardize your logs for your different applications. You're going to need to be able to cooperate with the different teams to make sure that there's a level of standardization. Every unique log file you're going to have to walk through and basically treat it as a murder mystery. It's going to be challenging, but you'll eventually get there. So let's talk about some of the questions that you should ask about the cultural shift that'll happen. So with moving to cloud native, you naturally start allowing self-orchestration for rollouts and updates. You start building this trusted ecosystem. No longer is it so much command and control, because all the different teams now have their power to get something released out there, which is great. It allows this level of trust to make things happen. One of the most interesting things I saw at one of the things I saw at one of the Asgard Labs companies was that they actually took an engineer and a developer from each microservice they created and then shift them around to the different teams every sprint. So for the first couple of sprints, it was really awkward because you had to teach someone, a brand new person every sprint, how to deal with that microservice. But before they realized it, after a handful of sprints, their documentation was phenomenal. Just truly phenomenal, because you had to onboard someone brand new who knew the ecosystem but didn't know that little widget. And then before they knew it, there was no tribal knowledge anymore, because everybody understood where all the different portions of the app were. So then they actually their productivity skyrocketed. And before you know it, they met people they never knew that were literally in the same building. This was before COVID, obviously. So anyway, I'll keep going. Obviously, you need to build that pipeline. You need to back to the automation earlier, but you need to build a pipeline to make this happen. You need to be able to run everything through to make sure everything standardized. One of the reasons why Go is so easy to read is because of the Go format command. Well, it's because in every good Go developer, they leverage Go format from inside their pipelines to make sure it's standardized. That takes away a level of cognitive overhead that you might have, because you're not debating the nuances of how a comma or a parenthesis is there. And that goes back to the collaboration, because you have to learn to collaborate with other teams, and you need these standardizations to work across. So all of a sudden, this all starts coming together. You are moving to this cloud native ecosystem, breaking this monolithic app up. But as you're going down that path, you're making this cultural shift to be able to make these changes happen. And collaboration isn't just status meetings, right? Or looking at tickets that you saw that's coming down those lines. It's now working with a shared level and shared contracts between jobs and responsibilities. Jira tickets will still exist, and they'll only get you so far. But going back to actually cross collaboration makes things really, really happen. Unfortunately, there will be people who are detractors from this, because they've always done the way they've wanted to do it, and they've found a way to be successful. You're going to have that friction. But the beauty of it is if you can keep chipping away at it, before you know it, you're winning your business, because that's what you're doing. You're writing the software to make money. Like, be frank. Like, you're not writing this to do something else. You're writing this software to be able to make your company make money so they can continue paying you. So if you take down all the different boundaries to be able to make them make money quicker, if anything, they should be happy about that. Next thing you need to think about is visibility and monitoring. Asgard Labs once thought they could just buy one product and call it a day. Nagios isn't going to cut this stuff anymore. Like, you can still run, hell, I still run Nagios in my house where I'm talking to you from. But you start need to having much deeper visibility into your application. You're not going to have a single pane of glass. It's unrealistic. Back to the murder mystery joke earlier. There's so many moving parts. You're going to need that level of cooperation and understanding of the application. It's a huge cultural change when you start really digging into it. But the beauty of it is because you have visibility and monitoring into it, and you start gaining these things from cloud native, all of a sudden responsibility is shared, and things are become a little bit more successful. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit here to make sure that we have time to ask some questions if you have any. But I do want to touch on the economics of the cloud is different from the data center. Well, of course it is. It really truly is. OpEx is no longer is now the way it works. Your CFOs will be so much happier when you start moving down this path, because they can start projecting actual costs. But at the same time, you have to take an eye on it and spend the time on it, because that leaving that one EC2 instance up, you'll have issues. I have a question here. Well, what are the best security practices one can implement in moving to microservices from a monolithic app? That is a wonderful question. And I want to take a moment and say, security is unbelievably, like, the beauty of security in moving to microservices is because now your attack vector is so much smaller because you're moving into microservices. You can start leveraging tooling that you normally wouldn't be able to do and focus on those smaller targets, especially with let's just take a bad example, just coming off the top of my head. We have a monolithic app. I make jokes about Java all the time. I'll continue making that joke. And it's running on CentOS 8 box, right? Well, you've got to keep that CentOS 8 box up to date all the time to make sure that you don't have all the different possible attack vectors there with bash or whatever, right? Well, the beauty of going to containerization and the beauty of leveraging microservices is you don't need bash in those containers anymore. So you've already scoped down the attack vectors of having it. Leveraging containerization and in turn building this microservices and in turn moving to cloud native, your attack vectors get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you can actually focus in on where possible issues are. There's a lot of different answers around there, but you no longer have this massive vector that you have to worry about because everything starts getting smaller, and there's a lot of great software around it too. So hopefully I answered your question. So let's go back to the economics. Again, you've got to keep track of it, and you've got to, you will start spending a little bit more money, most likely, but it'll be money that you're actually leveraging. And you're not going to have that random EC2 instance. You'll have just sits there and does nothing anymore. So you do need to spend in time for auditing. So what do you mean our support is now on Stack Overflow? Oh, got another question here. Can you tell us something about communication patterns and microservices? Yes. So when you start going down this path, the best way to think about it and the most successful way this is done, it's all done with a message queue, either a pub sub of some sort. There's multiple message queues out there. I'm not going to name them all. Or simple REST communication back and forth between services. Back to the collaboration I was talking about earlier, you will need to create shared contracts, shared APIs between the different microservices to make sure that things are stable. And it goes back to the collaboration, right? Where you're going to need to talk to your friend over in that other portion of your application. But the beauty of it is if you build up these microservices and this mentality, and you start actually sharing knowledge around it, you'll be amazed on what you can come out from it. But the majority of it is through HTTP and or message queues for pub subs right now. It's the same way that we've always done it. It's just outside of the application. Now it's done through either the cluster that is there or whatever. Obviously, it really depends on your situation of your actual application, and you need to spend and do your homework to figure out what it is. But there is a story there, and there is an opportunity. You just need to figure it out. So another question I have is the top 3 best practices to move from monolithic to microservices. Do your homework, and do your homework. I cannot stress that enough. If you're moving down that path, you need to realize that you are going to have issues, and it's not just an end-all be-all way of going. You're going to have to sit down and really do real engineering work to understand what's going on. You're going to need to have people who are specialized in those ecosystems, like Kubernetes or OpenShift, to be able to take the leverage and bring them into the conversation earlier to move down that. You're going to have to look at that strangler pattern and experiment. You get to go back to being a tinkerer, an engineer to be able to do this. No longer are you just writing code because you have to think outside the box. But before you know it, you'll have amazing things coming. And I'm so sorry, I just have less than a minute left. I do want to finish with this quote from another great friend of mine, Thomas Kate. And this is hopefully will hit home what I try to get across. Between collaboration and using the correct tool for the correct job, you wouldn't use a saw when you needed a hammer, or you wouldn't hammer when you needed a saw, right? Think about that for a moment. You can use a hammer as a saw. Like, I mean, you can just keep hitting a plank of wood. Eventually it'll break, right? That's what a saw does, is breaks a piece of wood in half. And you can use a saw to hammer in a nail if you need to. I mean, it's going to take you a while. It's going to go wah, 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 or whatever. But you can do it. So you've got to really take a moment and make sure that as you move down this path into the cloud native ecosystem, you use the correct tool for the correct job. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I hope I didn't go too far over your time. Again, on Twitter at JJAsgar, or no joke, really, please, truly email me at awesome@ibm.com. I am always willing to have a longer conversation about this.
Thank you, JJ, for walking us through the wonderful insights. So one last question, if you can take, like, is there any significant, like you have mentioned, a significant benefits, on walking us through microservices. So is there any targeted applications, or is it good for all applications, these kind of services?
Oh, great question. So is it just one specific, like is it only business logic behind the firewall, like just for my business, or is it like everybody? Honestly, yes. It depends, right? Like, it really does depend. And you have to take a moment and really look at your business requirements and to see if it's valuable. And that's what I was hoping to mention at the very beginning of this talk, is that if you're just going to do it because your executives told you to do it, you are going to have a bad time. You need to ask, is there a real value problem? If your application is already making you money, well, you're probably going to be writing another application pretty soon. Write that one as a microservice and don't touch the one that's already making you money. Right? Does it make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.